Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Democracy in America. By Alexis de Tocqueville. Two young Frenchmen arrived on the coasts of the United States in 1831, when the country was still relatively young and 30 years before the start of the American Civil War. The U.S. government sent Alexis de Tocqueville and Gustave de Beaumont, two of its longtime friends, to investigate the country's penal system. Both of them decided to leave France and search for new opportunities outside the nation. To understand democracy, they wanted to know more. If that's the answer they're seeking for, they'll need to study it well and learn how to implement it in their own country. From New York City, they toured the country for 9 months before returning to New York City in May of 1831. They researched American society as well as the jail system. As part of their study, they looked into the country's various aspects. They also went to Quebec and the rest of southern Canada. Once they reached Ontario, Canada's northernmost province, they continued northward. In France, Alexis and Gustave completed their reports and returned them. Gustave went on to create a novel about the social injustice of slavery in the United States, based on his experiences with his family on the journey. In 1835, Alexis published Democracy in America, the culmination of his studies. An in-depth examination of American life at that historical period is provided. He explains how the government works by breaking it down into its most basic components. If you're looking for a comprehensive introduction to social theory, this book is your best bet. It begins with a respect for the democratic system in place in the United States in 1831. According to Alexis de Tocqueville, nothing struck my sight more clearly than the equality of conditions during his time in America. Then he begins to outline the country's geography. The most magnificent dwelling ever provided by God for man was his praise for the Mississippi Valley. Even before Europeans arrived, the country was not completely deserted. Alexis found the Native Americans he encountered to have a strong sense of self-respect. According to him, they were not subservient even though they were impoverished, unlike the poor in his own nation. However, he discovered that the history of the past residents was unknown. Native American tribes were mostly hunter-gatherers, thus they didn't see themselves as landowners. Land was only held by farmers. According to Alexis, the area along the Mississippi River was ripe for industrialization because to its abundance of arable land and proximity to major transportation routes. An active community was in his mind's eye. However, in 1831, this was nothing more than a dream. Because the United States is a young nation, its past is more readily apparent than it is in Europe. However, those who moved to the United States spoke the same language, English. In addition, the early immigrants had a strong sense of self-government and an aversion to monarchy, which stemmed from the Tudor period. The Puritans who first landed in America, according to Alexis, established a higher standard of morality than anywhere else in the world. Because of the vastness of the country, Alexis believes that the feudal system would be inappropriate in the United States. A land baron would have a difficult time keeping track of all the acres of land he owns. There is also not enough farmland in the area to support a tenant and landlord. As a result, the middle class grew. As of now, the country is split into the North and the South. Alexis believed that men in search of gold had settled the southern states. Slavery was easy to create since the settlers, in his opinion, had a low moral standard. Their societal issues stem from this. According to Alexis, the first immigrants of the northern states were a highly educated group. Their Puritan faith was the driving force behind their decision to leave the safety and security of their native land. Alexis found the Puritan religion interesting since it adheres to a rigid democratic ideology. Puritans developed a society of order instantly, according to him. After the arrival of the Pilgrims in 1620, immigration to the United States accelerated, and the country experienced rapid growth. Because of this, Alexis believes that the United States has become a society homogeneous in every part. The country, in his opinion, has the most ideal kind of democracy ever. The English government was happy to see them go, as they feared they were revolutionaries in the making. In spite of their belief that they were subject to British rule, the newcomers maintained a sense of autonomy. They made changes to the legislation to accommodate their new environment. Criminal law in New England was largely influenced by biblical norms. Although the majority of the country agreed with these regulations, they might be exceedingly harsh. Their moral judgments are harsher than their laws, he concludes. A trial by jury and individual liberty were two of the Puritans' most innovative ideas, according to Alexis. However, Even though the state was ruled by the monarchy, each town had its own set of rules, and was organized like an independent republic. Many of these laws featured provisions for the needy and education for everyone else. As a result of the legal distinction between church and state, both have grown stronger. As the government was made more orderly by religious morality, the church was made more powerful by religious morality. Laws with Puritan or English foundations are distinguished by Alexis from those without. The more aristocratic the English legal system appears to be, the more English laws there are. The Anglo-American civilization is democratic, despite the southern states' efforts to impose an aristocratic way of life on the people of the region. Inheritance law is yet another American law. The wealth of a family is more evenly distributed in China than it would be in Europe, where the title and property are passed down to the eldest child. Alexis supports educational equality as another source of equality. Only a small minority have less than a high school diploma, while the majority have at least a bachelor's degree. Even when he's on vacation, he finds Americans to be just as enthralling as the Brits. There doesn't appear to be any aristocratic influence on the culture. It's unfortunate that Americans are willing to give up their freedom in order to be equal. If the higher classes want to be elected, they have to give up most of their power. The aristocratic culture in the United States will come to an end if the American people refuse to elect anyone who sees themselves as a ruler. The United States has two different governments, the federal government and the state government, with the state government occasionally wielding the most power. Various divisions exist within the state's legislatures. On the one hand, the township is in charge of administering local legislation. Laws are enforced by selectmen, who are elected annually. Any proposed modifications to the township's laws must be put to a vote by the town's residents. The town's numerous posts are held by 19 primary officials, and every resident chosen must fulfill the job to the best of their ability while observing all regulations. Giving residents a say in how their township is run encourages them to be good citizens. No one can wield too much authority, thanks to a system of checks and balances. An official is tried in the same court as everyone else who commits a crime. Aristocrats are tried in a separate court from everyone else in the European system. Nonetheless, one of the system's shortcomings is that it is difficult to monitor government personnel. People who benefit from the misdeeds won't come forward to report it, therefore the government has to rely on complaints. On the other hand, the county's power grows while the township's strength falls as Alexis travels further out into the country. As Alexis summarizes, American administration from Maine to Florida is characterized by the election of administrative officers, irremovability from office, absence of an administrative hierarchy, and the employment of judicial weapons to control secondary authorities. He noticed the most intriguing aspect of the federal government's decentralization. The Senate and the House of Representatives are the two legislative branches of the state government. To maximize authority, the Senate works in tandem with the House, which works to guarantee that all parties have a voice. Because this mechanism slows down the process, laws can be changed if necessary. A governor is elected to lead the state's executive branch. For the military, he is in charge of making sure all laws are observed. Because of the brief duration of his office, he is completely reliant on the support of his constituents. People in Europe have little say or interest in local issues. Government intervention is expected by these people. As a result, the people are no longer citizens, but rather subjects. People in the United States don't follow men's orders, they follow the letter of the law. When the common citizen takes it upon themselves to help catch a criminal, they perceive it as an infraction that affects everyone. People require freedom in tiny problems so that they can deal with larger issues. The lack of little liberties, according to Alexis, was a major element in the French Revolution's demise. In his opinion, the French Revolution was conflicted, leaning one way toward liberty and the other toward authoritarianism. He believes that, because of the French's desire to centralize, tyranny was easily established. Even if Americans disagree on nearly everything, they all share a passion for freedom. The courts have a lot of power because they base their decisions on the Constitution, which is always changing. In addition, the House of Representatives has the power to prosecute, while the Senate has the power to penalize. In this case, the punishment is, of course, removal from office. A courtroom is the only place where criminal cases can be tried. This system also protects against legislative tyranny because of the checks and balances it provides. Volume 1, Part 1, Chapter 8, begins with a discussion of the Constitution of the United States. When it comes to Alexis's origins, it begins with a look at the Articles of Confederation and how states fought for both independence and solidarity with the rest of America. He sings the virtues of the Revolution's forefathers, praising their sagacity and moral rectitude. Because they were still around to design the Constitution after the war, he says, they avoided an internal conflict. The central government's powers were clearly defined in the Constitution, and the states received all the remainder. This is why the Federal Supreme Court was then established. The federal government has the authority to wage war and maintain peace. Besides taxing, they are also in charge of regulating currency and postal service. Alexis sees that the federal government wields more power than many monarchies in many circumstances. So that he doesn't have too much power, but also doesn't have none, the legislature keeps tabs on many of the president's activities. The Senate must confirm his nominees and treaties with foreign countries, and Congress has the power to create laws to limit his authority. In addition, the legislature can override the president's veto with a two-thirds majority vote, even though the president has veto power. Even though they both rely on public opinion, the president has less power and legislators are observing his activities in comparison to a constitutional monarch in France. Alexis believes that a departing president has little motivation to try anything new. When a new president is inaugurated, there is a brief period of uncertainty in the government, but the president's authority is so limited that it is difficult to perceive the change. Alexis believes that an unstable executive power, such as the United States, poses a threat to international relations. However, America's isolation from the rest of the world protects it against foreign dangers. The federal courts deal with lower-level federal laws than the Supreme Court does. The president appoints the justices of the Supreme Court, who are then confirmed by the Senate. They are unable to be removed, which is designed to make them self-sufficient. Lawsuits filed on behalf of those who have been harmed by a statute are filed in federal courts. The subjugation of the legislative power to the will of the electoral body, and concentration of all other functions of the government into the hands of the legislative power are Alexis' two greatest risks to democracy, according to him. Compared to European countries with similar constitutions, the federal government of the United States is far more powerful since it is in charge of drafting and enforcing its laws. The flow of ideas and military effectiveness are also enhanced in a large country. U.S. citizens are free and happy like a tiny country, they're also powerful like a great one, Alexis says. Two major political parties dominated American politics after the Revolution, the Federalists, who sought to limit popular authority, and Republicans who sought to expand it. During Jefferson's presidency, the Federalist Party had a significant impact on the country's fledgling democracy. Alexis has noticed that the wealthy in the United States tend to keep out of politics. As a result, they go to great lengths to acquire authority for themselves. They will act like they favored the government, but in truth have a deep dislike for it. The freedom of the press is crucial in the United States to keep the people, who have the true power over the government, informed. Because criticizing the government is more common and less revolutionary in the United States, Alexis sees that the press there is less powerful than the press in France. Since Americans perceive a lack in journalistic ability, they do not focus on their own opinions, but rather just on the facts that are presented to them. There is less of a journalistic influence on American public opinion than there is in France. Unlike the House of Representatives, Alexis believes that the Senate is home to statesmen with vulgar demeanor who are eloquent and well-educated. He thinks this is because senators are elected indirectly, while representatives are elected directly. Alexis hopes that the United States will take a closer look at that system. Since elections are held so frequently, this creates uncertainty in the rule of law, which he believes is dangerous. He believes that most people who run for politics do so because they lack the ambition to take charge of their own lives and the affairs in their communities. In addition, their salaries are typically lower than those of political leaders. The more a person rises in the ranks, the lower their compensation is because the common person can't identify with them. France's taxes are higher because they have to maintain a larger army, but Alexis believes that the waste of money in the United States is far greater. Many resources are dedicated to aiding the underprivileged. Sovereigns and aristocracies are more inclined than in democracies to accept bribes from the populace. Also, he believes that a democratic government cannot survive a war. At first, they're enthused, but their enthusiasm gradually wanes. He also doubts their ability to quickly assemble an army. Foreign policy should not be handled by democracies. Because they have a stake in the government, American citizens are tremendously patriotic. Americans are well versed in political ceremonies, having received them as part of the country's founding ritual. Other countries would not be the same, according to Alexis. People would misuse their ceremonies, since they had never had them before. Even if they don't agree with the laws, Americans are more likely to abide by them since they passed them themselves. The political zeal of the average American fascinates Alexis. Despotism can be prevented by cultivating a habit of political freedom in oneself. Alexis is highlighting the power of the majority in the United States in Chapter 7 of Part 2. What matters most is the majority's viewpoint because everyone's opinions are equal. An individual who disagrees with the majority has very little remedy, which can be problematic. It is Alexis' belief that the majority's tyranny is to blame for the lack of quality writing in the United States today. When it comes to being creative, they aren't willing to defy the majority. The omnipotent majority restricts what people can say, believe, and write, despite the fact that they have the freedom to do so. She admires lawyers. He regards them as well-educated and aristocratic. They tend to be more conservative because they value order and the rule of law. In France, laws are written out more plainly than in America. Therefore, lawyers in France are not as regarded as they are in America, where only the lawyers can grasp the writings. Politics and religion go hand in hand. Therefore, religious ideals in the United States are beneficial to democratic and republican systems. Religion is a source of moral guidance and constancy, whereas politics is a fluid field of contention. The most liberated and enlightened citizens in the United States are also among the most devout. When Alexis wraps up Volume 1, she talks about Native American extinction and the loss of a highly brilliant people as they are integrated into American society. He thinks they're being mistreated. Afterwards, he addressed the African slaves. He thinks it's a difficult position. Racial prejudice prevents him from seeing how the slaves will fit in with the rest of society once slavery is abolished. In the northern states, slavery was abolished since it was not profitable, but the southern states will have a hard time because they fear the large number of slaves. Slaveholders will take over if they aren't liberated soon, according to Alexis. Among the white population, this might spell disaster. However, slavery does not lead to a clash of interests between the North and the South. Contrary to popular belief, opposing economic interests provide the most serious challenge to the United States. The South has grown increasingly hostile toward the North as its industrial might increases. Because of the Republican government's strong roots, even if the Union collapses, the United States will continue to exist. In the United States, there will be no kings. The ports of the United States are among the safest in the world, and the country's navy is world-class. Alexis believes that the United States of America will one day be the world's dominant naval force. In addition, he expects that the United States will take over the land currently controlled by Spain and extend throughout the rest of the country. America and Russia will also become superpowers, according to this prediction. This volume's introduction explores how democracy has influenced the development of American intellectual movements. Alexis claims that the American approach of philosophy is based on Descartes, which allows all ideas to be challenged. It is only possible for this scientifically skeptical attitude to thrive in a world where people have faith in their religion and kings. Cartesian methods are preferred by the French because they find them to be more mathematically sound. Alexis is of the opinion that Americans, in keeping with their proclivity for conforming to popular opinion, apply this to their conceptions of philosophy and religion as well. This causes people to essentially give up thinking for themselves and be influenced solely by the desires of the majority. When individuals are allowed to focus more on their government, religion provides answers to their questions before they are ever posed. Even if religion isn't true, according to Alexis, it still contributes to a person's well-being and self-respect. Knowledge is more prized in the United States because they place a higher value on money than on art. They also value religion, as long as it doesn't get in the way of accumulating material prosperity. They value religion. As a result, they tend to take a more practical approach to science. Rather than relying on theoretical investigations, science's value is measured by how much money is made from its research. We, as a nation, are insatiably materialistic. Quality trumps quantity in this case. Efficacy comes before aesthetics. America does not have any great writers that generate works of tremendous profundity or erudition since people choose to read for enjoyment in a democracy. Writers treat their profession more like a job than a vehicle for disseminating ideas. Politicians in democracies are more prone than their peers to want to impress their constituents, therefore they employ plain speech and dramatize it. By serving his fellows man serves himself and doing good is to his private gain, as the saying goes, is deeply ingrained in the psyches of Americans. The American love of creature comforts has allowed it to dominate the national taste in the United States. Instant pleasure has become the norm in the United States. Americans are more productive because they have a strong drive for affluence. Individual attendance is the best method for political leaders to show their support for the church, which is essential in a democratic society. In the United States, where everyone must work for a living and there is less inherited money, agriculture is seen as a distasteful vocation. Americans prefer the sector since it takes longer to see returns from farming. Despite the fact that industry owners have the potential to become practically aristocratic, they are prevented from doing so because aristocracy form close bonds with one another, whereas between peasants and foremen there is a reciprocal duty. Americans are not readily upset in their own nation, but they are easily offended in other countries when their government is attacked because of the equality in a democratic society. These people tend to be self-confident. Americans are willing to provide a helping hand, though, since they realize that it may very well be them in the same situation at some point. Women in the United States are less protected and more educated than their European counterparts because of this. As a result, individuals are able to make sound decisions. A man must prove his love to a lady before she will marry him because there are fewer socioeconomic disparities. Women have greater equality in the United States, and as a result, the majority of the country's success can be traced down to them. In order for democracy to thrive, it is essential to have a peace-loving populace and a war-loving army. Soldiers, on the other hand, have a strong desire to rise through the ranks, and they'll do whatever it takes to get there. In a war, the government gains more power, making it easier for citizens to forfeit their freedoms. Alexis argues that civil war is unlikely to break out in a democratic country because most people would perceive it as a threat to their economic well-being. As a result of the equality that Americans enjoy as a result of their democratic society, according to Alexis de Tocqueville, life in America has become more kind and humane. However, preserving freedom will be a difficult task. Biography of Alexis de Tocqueville. In July of 1805, Alexis Charles-Henri Clairol de Tocqueville was born in France. He was both a political theorist and a historian. His parents fled to England after narrowly avoiding the guillotine. While Napoleon was in power, the family returned to France. While his father was being elevated to peerage, Alexis was getting a better understanding of democratic ideals. During Louis Philippe's reign, he detested the July monarchy. Alexis was distrusted by both sides of the regime because of his political positions. That's why moving him out of France made sense. In this way, Alexis was able to gain access to the American jail system. In 1831, he and Gustave de Beaumont embarked on a journey that would last the rest of their lives. With Gustave de Beaumont, he began his journeys in 1831. Despite the fact that Alexis was supposed to be looking into the American jail system, he instead used the opportunity to do research for his book, Democracy in America. Both Gustave de Beaumont and Jacksoni in America, Marie or Slavery in the United States contain stories of their journeys. Alexis also visited England, where he penned Memoir on Pauperism, a travel memoir. After that, we'll head to Algeria. Alexis was a fan of indirect rule in the form practiced by the United Kingdom. Was also in favor of segregationist policies, particularly when it comes to Arabs and English people. Alexis visited Ireland in 1835. He witnessed the appalling conditions in which the tenant farmers lived. Even before the Great Famine, families were hungry and dying in filth. Including the burgeoning Irish Catholic middle class was Alexis' way of expressing his thoughts about it. Alexis was recalled to Paris in 1948, the year of the fall of the July monarchy, and elected to the Constituent Assembly as a representative of the French people. The Second Republic's constitution was drafted with his help. A supporter of two-chamber democracy, he believed in its virtues. Alexis also supported the right of all citizens to vote in the election of the President of the Republic. Alexis accepted the position of Minister of Foreign Affairs from June to October 1849 despite his sympathy for the June Days Uprising of 1848 and General Cavaignac. To limit club and press freedoms, he cast his vote. The arrest of demonstrators was also permitted by him, limiting their right to free speech. Democracy in America was full of praise for these steps, but he said he didn't want an earthquake of change, but a steady and gradual one. Alexis was imprisoned for a brief time for his involvement in an effort to have Napoleon III charged with high treason for having served an excessive number of periods in office. After that, he took a break from politics and went to his castle, where he lived out the rest of his days. Alexis would not be able to serve under a dictator. After 13 years of unsuccessfully trying to stop it, he finally gave up and turned to writing as a means of retaliation. In 1839, Alexis succumbed to TB after a long battle. The de Tocqueville Cemetery in Normandy is where he is buried. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.